Today's video is sponsored by Active Digital, supplier of mobile communication solutions to all types and sizes of business.
Hello everybody, the car world is certainly an unusual one. If I didn't believe it was interesting, I don't think I'd be doing the job I am today. However, when it comes to modifications, opinions vary wildly from brand to brand and country to country. For example, if you own a Japanese sports car, it's almost a part of the experience to modify it. Whereas in Europe, if you own something like a Ferrari or a Lamborghini, modifications are not seen in such the same way. Which is not to say, of course, that they don't happen. You only need to go to Knightsbridge or Birmingham to see that they certainly do. However, for the mainstream enthusiast, modifying something like an Aston Martin is practically sacrilege. Conveniently, there are also people out there who believe that a car can be improved on its original specification without going the full Need for Speed underground too. And today's car is an example of just that. It's been brought to me by Richard from the YouTube channel Challenge the Road. He's a very nice man and a big petrol head who's had a lot of very nice cars in his time, including a number, and I mean nearly double digits, of Aston Martin Vantages, and he currently owns a GT8. You may think that if you owned a GT8, you'd really have absolutely no reason whatsoever to play around with the lesser Astons. But he, like me, agrees that sometimes bigger, louder and faster isn't always better. And there is a lot to be said about the original 4.3 litre Aston Martin Vantage, which launched, can you believe it, 17 years ago. And despite its age, it still looks utterly stunning. As you may have already guessed, this one has had a few visual tweaks, and I'll take you through those in a moment. But before that, I want to tell you what the purpose of this car is and how it came to be. I still remember very clearly when this generation of V8 Vantage was released. I hadn't actually yet got my driver's license, but because of that, I was very interested in all the cars I definitely wasn't going to be driving when I did. I think it's no exaggeration to say that this could be the most important car Aston Martin made in the modern era. I felt sorry for Aston when the car came out because many journalists drove it and declared it a fine thing. However, they then all did that classic mistake of comparing it with a 911 and came to the conclusion that while the Aston was indeed brilliant, the 911 was just faster, steered a little bit better, and therefore was the car you should just keep on buying. At the time, that was a sentiment I pretty much agreed with, probably spurred on by the fact my dad had owned a 911 before and was about to buy another. I remember one day we were selling our house and a chap turned up in one of these and I was absolutely amazed by it. I stared in wonder at the rev counter and thought Aston Martin build quality surely couldn't be so bad that they put the numbers on the wrong way round. It was then a long time before I actually got to drive a Vantage, and when I did, I found a lot to like. And these days, if you gave me a choice between a 911 of the era and one of these, it would be the Aston every time. Which is not to say that they were without fault. The engine was criticised for being just not as punchy as it should have been. It had more power than the old 911 C2S, but it also weighed quite a bit more, thereby eliminating its own advantage. And the steering, while brilliant, was just not quite as brilliant as the 911s. In spite of that, the baby Aston, as we came to call it, was a certified hit. And people still love it. Easily the biggest seller the company had had to date, and a rather wonderful car then and now. But people will always want more, and Aston themselves have tried to improve the Vantage in many ways over the years. The interior got a little bit more modern, a little bit snazzier as time went on. The Volvo sat-nav, which was oft criticised, eventually did get improved, but about a decade too late. I have driven a number of the spicier cars, including the V8S, the V12 Vantage, the V12 Vantage S, and the later cooking variety too. However, whenever I've driven one of the spicier cars, I've often found it to be quite compromised. The V8 Vantage S, for example, came as standard with an automated manual gearbox that was not really very good at all. If you compare it with the Ferrari system at the time, it wasn't good enough. The V12 Vantage then had a suspension that was just far too stiff, and the later GT8 and GT12 looked a little bit daft with their big wings, their huge side skirts, and made an awful racket. They are cars not for your classic Aston driver. They're not the sort of thing I can imagine crossing Europe in. And so, this is how you arrive at a car like this, because Richard looked at his GT8 and thought, that's a very good car, but I reckon I can make something just as nice to drive for a lot less, because like me, he thoroughly believes in sharing his passion for cars, and doesn't believe that simply spending more always gets you more. Not content with making just one car, he has in fact come out with a model lineup. At present, there are two versions of the car, both based on the early 4.3 Vantage. There is this performance-orientated version, and there is also a touring specification car as well, and the differences are much as you might imagine. So, what's changed about this over a regular 4.3? The most obvious thing is the colour. Doesn't really make a single bit of difference to performance, but my life, doesn't it look good? It's a Lamborghini hue, and it's called Blue Vathis. I should point out that this car is still what you'd term a work in progress. I'm sure you can also tell that the weather today isn't exactly conducive to a full-bore road test, so instead consider this first impressions more than an in-depth review. Up front, you've got different treatments for the mesh grills in the bonnet, and perhaps the most distinctive element of the car, aside from the paintwork, is the driving lights. Richard is somewhat fastidious, and he has been experimenting with a number of different configurations for all of the elements on this car. Richard is big into his rally cars. In fact, he owns a couple of Colin McRae's, and that's one of the reasons he was inspired to put the driving lights on. He says in the dark they have absolutely transformed this car, but the first ones he put on were just a bit too big. These look much better. They also strike me as a nice little tip of the hat to the old Cibbies, which are so popular in the 70s and 80s. On the side, you'll find N430 lightweight alloy wheels. They're 19 inches and wrapped in Michelin Pilot Sport 4S rubber. Probably the best tyres you can get for a car like this. There are spacers to help the tyres fill the arches a little bit better. And one of my favourite things about this car thus far is when you look in your wing mirrors, you can actually see a little sliver of rubber poking out from the rear arch. Not extending beyond it, I should point out, but you can just see it a bit more than you would on a normal car. One thing this car does not have is a great big side skirt. That's something Aston put on nearly all of the later and fruitier cars, but Richard felt that it ruined the purity of the original car's design. And I kind of get where he's coming from. On the rear, you'll find a new diffuser, and happily he resisted the temptation to make it in carbon. One of the things he wanted to do with these cars was still try and keep them relatively affordable. So one of these, depending on how you specify it, you'll be able to get for about £60,000. He's still on the fence as to whether this is going to be offered as a conversion kit to existing customers or not. And one of the last visual changes is the addition of a very subtle colour-coded lip spoiler on top of the existing one. I'm told at high speeds, which we won't be achieving today, it does help give the car an added sense of stability. In terms of the mechanical side of things, the car has custom-spec'd nitron dampers, which are very adjustable. It has new springs. It has a non-valved back box, which actually is one element I'm not too keen on because it's a bit too loud for my liking. These cars are really well insulated, and that exhaust is quite noisy. And if it's that noisy in here, it's going to be ruddy loud outside. Happily, if the exhaust is not to taste, he already has an alternative, because for his touring specification cars, the default choice there is a valved system, which in its quiet mode really is quiet. Most interestingly though, in terms of performance, Richard has tried to largely leave the car alone. There's a considerable weight saving of some 70 kilos, and that's been achieved through the fitment of various items, the biggest one being these Cobra Nagaro seats, which I utterly love. They suit this car so well. I used to own a pair of these, I had them in my Evora 400, and they are marvellous. They are in fact much better than Aston Martin's lightweight seats, and the joke about those was the fact that they're lightweight carbon bucket seats that still have a load of electric motors on them. These are manual. It also means I won't be able to do the classic Aston thing of adjusting my seat as I go to change gear because my wallet hits the controls down here. That was a daft piece of design from Aston, I have to say. You will almost certainly have noticed the CTR branding on the car. I think he could probably lose a couple of those. It's a little bit too much. This isn't a very large cabin, so I don't think you need quite so much. What I am going to feed back to him though, like I said, this is a work in progress, is that there are many CTR badges in this car, and I can't actually see any of them from where I am now. So a sort of subtle one over here somewhere I think would be quite nice, and you don't need so many here. He has even gone to the extent of making the pedal setup even easier to heel and tow. And in this car, he has resisted the urge to fit a lightweight clutch and flywheel. He actually has that in the other car, odd I know, but he felt it just ruined the pedal feel a little bit. And having driven quite a few Astons with a lightweight clutch in them, I kind of agree. That is a common weak point of many an Aston. The clutch engagement is just so vague. It's really quite annoying. It means they're very easy cars to stall, and they shouldn't be. Unless you've been living under a rock for quite a while, you've probably seen other videos on the regular V8 Vantage. So today, all I really need to tell you is whether what Richard done has worked. And the answer is yes. It's been a while since I've driven a regular 4.3, but in the interim, I have driven some of the more special Astons. The closest to this in terms of price and ethos would be the N430. And I gotta be honest here, I much prefer this. It is damped really quite nicely. It's not yet perfect, it's perhaps a little bouncy at lower speeds, but again, not anywhere near as bad as the M430, but like that car, when you pick up the speed, it does flow really quite nicely. This rides like I'd expect a sporty Aston. I wouldn't want it any firmer than this, and I'd really need a better day to be able to test it thoroughly. First impressions, very positive. The engine, all they've really changed is the air filter and the exhaust, so it behaves more or less like you'd expect it to. The extra vim and vigour comes courtesy of the lightened weight. This car now tips the scales at about 1,550 kilos versus the sort of 1,630 of the regular car. The exhaust is one element that I don't like. The quality of the noise is fine. The quantity of it, it's not for me, but that's easily changed. The visual makeover I also really like. It looks amazing, this car, but the changes are all subtle ones. The GT8 really is a sort of visual sledgehammer, and not to all tastes. It's not really to mine. In terms of the interior, well, all the elements I would criticise are Aston ones, not CTR ones. So all this stuff here always looked out of date even when it was new, and that's really about the worst I can say about it. These seats are absolutely brilliant, and one of the best things about them is that you sit just a little bit lower than in the regular car. The Aston Martin lightweight seats, not only are they not so lightweight with motors still attached, but you also sit fairly high and you feel like you're still perched on them. They don't feel like a proper buckety seat in the same way, say, a Cayman GT4 with the 918 items in it. The pedals work really nicely. The gear lever's also a new item. It's got a little digital display on it, so it tells you what gear you're in. That's a gimmick I can do without, but the lever itself is really nice to hold. The engine revs freely, and it's a beautiful thing to pilot. Steering feel is also absolutely excellent. The weighting is just right. It's probably on the lighter side of average for a sports car, but the texture is absolutely beautiful. That's something you often find when you start to reduce the unsprung mass in a car. Here you have those lightweight wheels. You've also got new discs and pads, and he's working on some slightly larger discs, but that's going to require a little bit more work. The calipers are standard Aston items. The brakes are superb. I can't test their stopping power today, but pedal feel is perfect. Building a car like this is never easy. You can make an Aston faster, louder, lighter. That's not difficult. But trying to keep what's Aston about it while still adding is a real art. 60 grand certainly sounds like a lot of money. However, if you look at the current car market, you'll realise it isn't. Early 4.3 Vantages you used to be able to get for around £20,000. Now you'll struggle to get a decent one below 30, which makes what Richard has done appear like even better value. There are a couple of M430s up for sale at the moment, but they're both 65 grand and they have the Sport Shift gearbox in them. They were available with a manual, but at present there are none in the country for sale. If you want even more performance from this car, you can go and spend a lot more money on a fancy exhaust manifold and get a few more ponies. But to me, this is already quick enough. On a day like today, I've barely even gone past 4,000 RPM, and still, this is absolutely sensational. That's only just the speed limit there. That's about the first time in this video I've actually hit the speed limit. This is what an Aston Martin is all about to me. The look, the drama, the noise, the feel, and on all of those, this car scores extremely highly. What an Aston needs to do is flow with the road and put a smile on your face. This does. This is a special car, and Richard should be very proud of what he's created. At some point in the near future, I may be able to try the touring specification car. Richard has also got quite a few other toys in his collection. I've driven one previously, which is the Murcielago SV. That was a lot of fun. But in all honesty, today, in this weather, on these roads, I would take this over that every time. As I've said a couple of times already, this is still a work in progress, and therefore not perfect. But anything not right with the car is easy to change, and when I get back to Richard, I'll certainly be telling him that this is work well worth continuing. Thanks to you all for watching. Please like, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure to head over to Richard's channel, subscribe to that, where you can follow the progress on this car and his others. We'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.